Hi, everyone. We're live today with a continuing series of secret societies highlighting Skull and Bones with War Hamster Brady. How are you, Brady?
I am good. I am cold. It is snowing outside, but I'm looking forward to today's show.
And I was just rubbing it in because I just came in from outside. It's like almost 80 here already, and I was sitting in the sun with my grandson.
That's why we're taking a trip to the Bahamas next month. I need some of that sunshine.
It is so addictive.
Well, you're smiling also because I think you and I are taking a victory lap. USAID, which we have been talking about ad nauseum, is in the news. And I think it's great because Elon started talking about, everyone was talking about, oh, look at all this government money being funneled into DEI and they're shutting that down. And I was on X saying, whoa. The bigger story is what they do contributing to the Operation Gladio government overthrows. And now that's coming into people's awareness, a lot of people for the very first time. And did you catch Michael Schellenberger tying in some of this USAID money to the attempted impeachment of Donald Trump?
Yes.
What have we been talking about for forever? Thank you.
The 4 soft coups against Donald Trump were CIA operations, and their front, USAID and National Endowment for Democracy, has been intimately involved in all of it.
Yep. And I think what's going to be really fun is when they check out the Vindman brothers and their relatives in Ukraine and how much USAID money they have received.
Yes.
That's out there.
Well, Elon Musk has already said that. And remember, he has all of their DMs. So he's already basically said he's a criminal. And the beauty of all of this is it gives those of us who've done this research the ability to pull the research and push it out, even though, of course, we've been pushing it out for, as you said, years. They're now apparently ready to provide the top cover for those of us who've already done the research. And I did a show last night at 9:30 with Alpha Warrior on USAID. I talked about the 3 big pieces, DAI, however you say the Kim one, and Deloitte. All of them are massive recipients of these billions of dollars, and each and every one of them are a CIA front.
Yeah, that's one of the things that one of my complaints is that they didn't shut down at USAID. It's a misconception. They folded it into State Department. They're going to review every one of the grants.
Hold on. But they didn't fold it into it. This is a very important point, Brady, and thank you for bringing it up. What they actually did in Rubio's announcement, for those of you who've not spent time inside the government, was very specifically worded. He is dual-hatted as the director of USAID and the Secretary of State, which means there was no commingling of USAID and the State Department.
Okay, that's good. But one of the reasons I was worried about it, because look, we both know the USAID is important, but I want to see the audit of the State Department and their $58.8 billion budget, and I want to see the Pentagon audit, and that's the one that they are going to fight back on. I mean, they're shrieking right now, casting lawsuits about the Treasury Department getting audited. Wait till they go after the Pentagon. That's
yeah. I've been on the inside of that monster too.
Yeah.
But I want him to find all of the CIA fronts and audit them.
That's going to take a while, but we'll get there. And what helps is just in 2024, we've got thousands of investigative reporters on our keyboards. And it's a big part of what we do is we give them breadcrumbs to follow. And it's amazing what some of our people we communicate with on X, what they come back with. There's just so many good researchers. So we might get a lot more truth. It's an amazing time to be alive, because I never thought, it feels surreal to see all this stuff. We knew it was true, but we couldn't prove it. Or we could.
I don't know that we couldn't prove it. I have lots of proof. I mean, every one of these books, 87 books, it has all of the unclassified, declassified State Department memorandums, the declassified CIA, testimony in congressional records. The proof is all there. What we didn't have was top cover in order to be able to get it mainstream. The information's been out there for decades.
Yeah, that's well said. I was kind of trying to self-correct to say that same thing. Yeah, we didn't make it up. It's not like we don't have magic powers of to find these things out. It was there if you look for it. All right, before we jump into our topic, I have a little bit of a surprise. I got an email a couple weeks ago from historyfacts.com, and and the article is called "Meet America's Gilded Age Dollar Princesses." And I wanted to share it because, one of the stories we keep talking about is how it's almost like, Follow the Wives. All these different families that are in all these positions of power, they intermarry with these other families. You have to be of the right blood and stuff like that. This story really ties into it. And before we got too further down the timeline, I thought it was really important to share it. So we'll go through it pretty quickly, but I think you'll enjoy this. Okay, Meet America's Gilded Age Dollar Princesses. And there's an actual term called a dollar princess. The Gilded Age, of course, was what came after the Civil War. And the robber barons amassed amazing amounts of concentrated wealth, people like the Carnegies, Rockefellers, etc. And basically, they are the ones who have got an awful lot of ties in the secret society, Skull and Bones especially. And they really are a super class that has run America for quite some time. Okay, just a big thing. The turn of the 20th, I'm going to blow this up and make it a little easier to see. Okay, so the turn of the 20th century marked a time of rapid industrialization and wealth accumulation in the U.S., now known as the Gilded Age. A unique social phenomena emerged during this era as wealthy American heiresses married into aristocratic British families. The brides brought their extensive fortunes to England's cash-strapped noble families in exchange for coveted British titles and social status. The term dollar princess captures the transactional nature of these unions, which often symbolize the blending of the New World wealth with Old World prestige. Kind of pretty much what we've been talking about. So without going through the entire article, I just wanted to highlight a few of these because they do tie into our stories. Okay, we had Miss Consuelo. There she is with a great hairdo. Consuelo Vanderbilt. Perhaps the most famous dollar princess, Consuelo Vanderbilt, was born into the staggeringly wealthy Vanderbilt family, and they've shown up in Skull and Bones. When Consuelo married Charles Spencer Churchill, the 9th Duke of Marlborough, in 1895, her father was a railroad tycoon. William Kisson Vanderbilt signed an agreement providing a dowry of $1.6 million, equivalent to about $60 million today. Another $2 million in stocks.
So, Hamster, as soon as you said that first paragraph before you named it, this is what I wrote. Biltmore Churchill. Because I went to, when we did our New England tour, I went to all of the Vanderbilt in Newport, Rhode Island, all of those big mansions. And on our way back, we had done the loop up to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, came back through North Carolina and went to the Biltmore Estates for the first time. And that Biltmore Estate has a basement in it that was painted by a artist for a party of the joining of the Biltmore daughter with that aristocratic English guy. And it's so satanic, it's not even funny. So that just like stuck in my head. The whole bottom of the basement is like crazy, weird art. So I've seen this firsthand. Go ahead.
I wonder if you can find that online anywhere. I'd like to see it.
Oh, you can. As a matter of fact, I can show you the pictures. Keep going.
Do that after. Let's do that after. Continuing, look at this the Jenny Jerome. She's the daughter of American financier Leonard Jerome. She became Lady Randolph Churchill. Again, While the Churchills were initially resistant to the match, Jerome's $250,000 dowry, more than $9 million today, convinced them to reconsider. She would get involved in things like the Primrose League, which is a socio-political organization. A lot of these marriages, when they brought back across the Atlantic, is where the whole Fabian Society came to America through all this stuff.
Yes.
She had 2 sons from her first marriage, one of whom is Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister. Just pause there.
Yes. Perfect.
We've got a Mary Leiter, who's married to George Curzon, who would later serve as the Viceroy of India. She was known as the Vicereine of India, the highest official title that any American woman had ever held in the British Empire. Interesting. Then, of course, there's Nancy Astor from the famous Astor family. And there's wealthy Astors in England and wealthy Astors in America. This one came from the American Astors. She's the first woman to sit in the British Parliament. She had a brief, turbulent marriage that ended in divorce. She moved to London, and the American heirs attracted a bunch of British bachelors, and one of her suitors was Waldorf Astor, from the Waldorf Astoria fame. We got a Helena Zimmerman. She married a guy named William Montagu, the Duke of Manchester.
Yeah, I've read a lot about him.
So I thought that was that story was good enough to share.
So let me see if I can just real quick. I'm not very good at this, but let me share my screen here and see if I can do the entire screen. And then I'm going to go to my photos because I have it. Can you see my photos?
I can't see your screen yet.
Okay, it says Chrome has lost permission to capture your screen. To fix it, oh, it's not going to let me.
You have to go into settings.
Yeah. I don't. All right, never mind. But I will post these pictures because you have to understand that I don't even have Google Chrome. I don't even know what that crap is. And I've been able to do this before, but whatever. You have to have some of the pictures in context of the inside of the Biltmore and then see the pictures of the basement because it's crazy. So anyway, proceed.
All right, back to our main story of secret societies. We left off, we were talking about the, bear with me, let me find where I am. We'd finished in the class of 1918, which took us through the lovely Lovett. Robert Lovett is where we left off.
Yeah.
All right, so picking up in 1918, we didn't get to an important name. And we're going to spend most of this show talking about the Taft dynasty. In 1918, let's start with the big picture here. What are we trying to say? Our theory has been that these aristocratic families basically are a superclass that run the country, and they do so behind closed doors. A lot of them are members of a secret society, especially Skull and Bones. And these people are all connected to the major power positions, whether it be corporate America, the educational institutions, foundations, and all throughout government, including especially foreign policy, the presence of the United States, and are all through the courts. And through these positions, they are able to dictate American policy, particularly foreign, for the benefit of their own multinational corporations and other financial interests. So that's the theory. And we're just going to keep on proving it. So Charles Phelps Taft II was a bonesman in 1918. Let's talk about it. Yeah, why is he famous? Well, mostly because of his bloodline, but he does a few things. He was the mayor of Cincinnati, which is about as high as he made it. But there's a lot of Cincinnati ties to influence in a lot of the old families of Cincinnati, especially the Taft family.
A lot, yeah.
Interesting. And remember this name, Fortune Magazine, because we're going to come back to Fortune Magazine later today. Ranked Cincinnati when he was the mayor as the best managed city in the United States. So he is, of course, the son of William Howard Taft, who we've covered, the former president of the United States, who was also the only person ever to sit on the president of the United States and sit on the Supreme Court. He's also a Skull and Bonesman. He's the grandson of Alfonso Taft, who's one of the two co-founders of Skull and Bones in 1833. Alfonso, of course, was a United States Attorney General, also the Secretary of War, which we now call the Secretary of Defense, and the ambassador to Austria, Hungary, and Russia in the late 19th century. So,
oh gosh, isn't that where they had all the problems?
Gee, imagine that. But we our very first or second episode, we did Alfonso and William Howard Taft in a lot more detail.
Right.
I want to spend some time on the rest of their
crew,
on the rest of the family, because William Howard Taft had a brother named Henry Waters Taft, who was a bonesman in 1880. He was a lawyer. Was a partner in a law firm by the name of Cadwallader, Wickersham, and Taft. That is a very, very well-known white shoe law firm that's been around since the 1790s. The Cadwallader in that name was the Assistant Secretary of State for Ulysses Grant. And the Wickersham in that family was the U.S. Attorney General under President William Howard Taft. So this law firm is really well connected. Wickersham, interestingly enough, was also once the president of the Council of Foreign Relations.
Of course he was.
Of course. This firm was involved in one of the big cases was the custody trial determined the guardianship of Gloria Vanderbilt.
Ooh.
And these guys are also the advisors for the U.S. Treasury during the Chrysler and GM restructuring, which I found interesting. And another one of their alumni. I went through all the Cadwallader White alumni. Sorry, the Cadwallader, Wickerman, and Taft alumni. The most recent one that we've heard of recently is a guy by the name of Michael Horowitz.
Oh, you can't make this up. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, the Inspector General of the Department of Justice, Michael Horowitz, is from that same.
Allowed all the coups.
Uh-huh.
Holy shit. You just literally can't make it up.
These guys also prosecuted I think Taft helped prosecute the Tobacco Trust in 1907 when they were breaking up all the money trusts.
Which is basically a restructuring.
Mm-hmm. So I found a fun quote from Henry Waters Taft. I don't want to read the quote. It's a pretty long one, but he's at a convention of the American Bar Association where all the delegates made a trip to the Bohemian Grove. That's where I found him. Yeah, go ahead. And he said, absolutely claimed, he goes, my brother, President William Howard Taft, was also very fond of Bohemian Grove. What do we know about Bohemian? Yeah, what do we know about Bohemian Grove?
Well, so to put this in context, so everybody understands, I mean, we've all seen the video. We know what we think we know about Bohemian Grove. What most people don't understand about Bohemian Grove, so I'll just mention it, is when we were doing our research, we found a lot of European, which fits right in the middle of this lesson. You're talking about marrying into the European aristocracy, right? So you wouldn't be at all surprised that they had St. Hubris hunt clubs throughout Europe. St. Hubris hunt clubs, if you search in some really interesting places, you find out that they didn't just hunt animals. They are where the origins of these hunts that people like Marc Dutroux and others in the Netherlands, Marc Dutroux was in Belgium, orchestrated hunting children. St. Hubris was, their origins is from the Bohemian area of Europe, Eastern Europe. Their first site in America was Bohemian Grove. That's the first registered St. Hubris club in America. Just for context, Admiral Poindexter, who was infamous for the Iran-Contra Operation Gladio, had a ranch in Texas. That ranch was the Texas head of the St. Hubris Hunt Club for Texas.
Of course it was.
And that's where Scalia was murdered. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Pretty fascinating stuff. And these are the, we just talked about the Anglo-American, alliance, marrying American money. But these are the people that would then carve up the entire world after the Versailles Treaty in World War I and post-World War II. And it's what emerges what's called the Anglo-American rules-based order. And basically those rules are all to benefit these people. And
they created all of the fake countries and all of the fake boundary lines that are the sources of the strategy of tension to create the perpetual military industrial complex, which gave birth to NATO and Operation Gladio.
Last thing on Henry Waters Taft is that he wrote articles supporting the League of Nations. He was very pro League of Nations, which ties in the idea of the skull and bones is known as the order. All these people have pushed this globalist idea known as the New World Order. The League of Nations was one of their earliest attempts to make that happen.
Correct.
All right. Our next Taft, the third brother, was Horace Dutton Taft. Skull and Bones, 1883. He would leave Yale and go to Cincinnati Law School and didn't really like law, so he got into education instead. And after what's that?
I said, of course he did. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, he founded something known as the Taft School in 1890. And that's just a little bit away from here in Watertown, Connecticut. And its whole reputation was for preparing children of the Midwestern gentry to get into Yale. We've talked about how these private elitist boarding schools and private schools were really just a breeding ground for the Ivy League and then, basically government running the world. This is a really good example of that. In 2015, Business Insider ranked it the 14th most elite boarding school in the country. And that formula, how they ranked it, was interesting. It's they look at the financial endowment, the SAT scores, and the acceptance rate in schools. It's now co-ed, but interestingly enough, this is a private school, high school, grades 9 through 12. It has an endowment of $300 million. Let that hang there for a second. How does a school have an endowment of $300 million? And why?
And who did he marry and where is she from?
I did not take notes on who he married.
He married Winifred Shepherd Thompson from Buffalo.
Okay.
And you remember that Buffalo is the source of a huge pot of wealth. The Rumsey family and many others that gave birth to Wild Bill Donovan and that whole crowd. So
another connection.
Yeah.
Okay, then we had a Robert Alfonso Taft, which was class of 1910, which I skipped over previously. And of course, he did the typical skull and bones, Yale undergrad, Harvard Law, which we've seen how many dozens of times?
Yeah.
Harvard Law is absolutely a breeding ground for these puppeteers and masters of the universe. But Robert marries a woman named Martha Wheaton Bowers. She's the daughter of Lloyd Wheaton Bowers, who was a skull and bonesman, of course, in 1878, and would become the U.S. Solicitor General in 1909 and 1910 under who was president then? Taft. His father, what is it? their children married, Tim and Taft, and Taft gives him a job as U.S. Solicitor General. And had he not died, he had just been appointed or nominated to be on the Supreme Court of the United States of America. But he passed away in 1910.
Wow.
So is that incestuous enough for you?
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Again, that's amazing that children don't have three eyes. Oh boy.
And so are we going to go through all of the Tafts?
I've got a few more.
Okay.
And if I miss any,
no, keep going. You're doing awesome.
All right. So Robert Alfonso Taft, Bowmansman 1910, gets out of school and spends 2 years working for the FDA. The FDA, of course, was founded by the Rockefellers.
To ruin our food supply.
Yes. Until Bobby Kennedy came along, hopefully.
Yeah.
So during the war, he goes over to Paris, of all places, in 1918, 1919, and he works as a legal advisor for the American Relief Administration. And if you've been following the Colonel or myself, every time you see one of these international aid or relief type organizations, you got to ask questions. The default position should be, what the heck are they actually up to? You know, just like we saw with all this USAID grants, they pose as some kind of do-gooder organization, but the money probably gets filtered other places. And 1918, 1919 in Paris was, of course, where the treaty, where the whole world post-World War I was carved up. So he was there.
Yes.
The guy who ran the American Relief Administrations was a guy by the name of Herbert Hoover. And they met each other then. This Robert Alfonso Taft and Hoover met. Robert Alfonso was another one who urged for the League of Nations. He was pushing for that. He goes back home and he becomes, this is a big name. It should be a household name. He was actually known as, quote unquote, Mr. Republican. Goes back to Ohio and becomes a U.S. Senator and serves from 1939 to 1953. He was helping to block the New Deal, or the expansion of the New Deal. So he was in opposition to FDR's programs. Keep that in mind, because FDR's policies come back up later today. He was opposed to the Bretton Woods Agreement, which basically is the post-World War II financial system. There was agreement made 30 miles that way from where I'm sitting. Mm-hmm. He's also one of the co-sponsors of the Taft-Hartley Act in 1947, which restricted the unions and created right-to-work states. So that was good. So this guy's pretty much of a staunch, old-school Rockefeller Republican at this point. He sought the Republican nomination for president several times. 1940 and 1948, he fell short. In 1952, he was leading, and a bunch of other movers and shakers didn't want him. So they went and convinced the very popular Eisenhower to run for president as a Republican. Eisenhower was also considering running as a Democrat, but he ran as a Republican and Taft was out of it, so he never got to run for president. So he was what they call a non-interventionist, and that's going to be a real big theme in today's show. He opposed the United States. He did not want the U.S. entry into World War II. Now that's interesting because we already know that his skull and bones brethren, people like Prescott Bush, the Dulles brothers, the Walker family, the Harrimans, were the ones that were financing Nazi Germany. And he is pushing from the Senate to keep us out of the war and basically damaging their investments. Fair statement?
Well, a couple of things. If I'm not mistaken, he didn't want to be in NATO either.
That's correct. He also didn't want us in the United Nations.
And was it his dad, the Taft, that was the Governor General of the Philippines? I'm almost sure it was. Let me check real quick. Yeah. Okay. Yes. So here's where my notes, I was just doing a real quick search. William Howard Taft was the governor of Cuba back in 1906 when we took it after the Spanish-American War. I'm pretty sure that's the timing of it. But he also spent time in the Philippines as a governor general there as well.
Yeah, I think we covered that in this one. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, because that's very, very important based on what we did there. That was the Gladio before Gladio, remember?
Hmm.
Because the people there had been fighting for their independence for decades before the Americans, quote unquote, won the Spanish War, and they were fighting with the Americans to win the Spanish War in these locations, and then America turned on them, just like we did in Vietnam, just like we did in China, just like we did everywhere. We had an ally until we didn't want him as an ally, and then we attacked him, and that's what we did in the Philippines and Cuba, and this is part of the family that did that. So go ahead.
Yeah, and as we big picture, we've been talking about who runs Americans' foreign policy as we keep screwing other people over, and it's these people we're talking about.
Yes.
Couple more interesting factoids about Mr. Robert Alfonso Taft. He, as you said, he opposed NATO. He condemned the Nuremberg trials as ex post facto laws, and he had a point. He supported Israeli statehood earlier on, and he was very critical of Truman's handling of the Korean War. He would die in 1953 from a brain hemorrhage. In 1957, this is how big of a deal this guy was. The Senate committee named him, quote, one of America's 5 greatest senators in history. And the rest of that list is Henry Clay, who was Lincoln's mentor, Daniel Webster, John C. Calhoun, one of the best constitutionalists we've ever had, or if you believe in limited government, Robert M. La Follette Sr., who I don't know much about. But if you go to the Senate reception room, those 5 gentlemen, their portraits are all right there on main display. So this guy was American political royalty. And he had children, and they are fun. His first child was Robert Alfonso Taft Jr., so his own namesake. He went to the Taft School for high school, went to Yale, but was not a bonesman, which is interesting. And we're going to diverge away from the bones a little bit here. And of course, from Yale, it goes to Harvard Law. Make that 35 straight times we've seen that. He would join the Sons of the American Revolution, which, just like the Daughters of the American Revolution, very interesting organizations. You can't join unless you can trace your heritage back to the founding generation, I believe. He serves in the House of Representatives from Ohio. Again, there's that Ohio connection from 1963 to 65 and 67 to 71.
Okay,
when he becomes, yep.
Hold on. Give me those years again.
63 to 65 and 67 to 71.
67 to 71. So that's critical timing, actually. 63 to 65 would have been at the beginning of the LBJ reign, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kennedy gets assassinated. So he's there the year building up to the Kennedy assassination. And then 67 to 71 is during the end of, the turbulent time of 68 with LBJ and MLK being murdered, the changing of the guard from LBJ over to Nixon. Those are critical windows.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I'm glad you stopped me. He left the House and runs for Senate and wins, becomes a U.S. Senator from Ohio from 71 to 76. And then he kind of rode off into the sunset. Just part of the legacy. He had a son, Robert Alfonso Taft III, who once again went to Yale, but was not a bonesman. He leaves college in the 60s and joins the Peace Corps. And he goes to Tanzania. And the years are 1963 to 1965.
Because it had just been created by JFK.
And right next door to them was the Mozambique revolution was going on, and all kinds of regime change was going on. And he's there in the Peace Corps.
Yeah,
Allegedly.
we had just murdered Lumumba and destroyed the Congo, set up Katanga, and was in the process of installing Mubatu in renaming the Congo Zaire. So basically, he's there in Africa when it's on fire.
Exactly. That's why I thought that was important. And I don't have any record of it, but what do you think the odds are that he's affiliated or with the CIA?
I would say it's probably very high.
Yeah, they made that. There was a movie made back in the 80s where God, who was it? I remember the actor. I'm terrible with actors, but guy had a gambling debt, so he joined the Peace Corps over in Thailand. And of course, the guy who's supposed to be on the Peace Corps was actually some CIA guy. I should remember the name of that movie. Someone in the chat, it's Tom Hanks is the actor. Someone remind me of that movie. I need to see it again. It was funny. All right. So what else did Robert Alfonso Taft Jr. do? I'm sorry. This is the third we're talking about. So he leaves Tanzania, has an interesting law degree. Eventually, he would unseat a Democrat Secretary of State who at the time was a guy by the name of Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown, who just got unseated by J.D. Vance. Was it J.D. Vance that beat him, or no, who's the guy who just won in Ohio? Anyway, Sherrod Brown's been around Ohio politics a long time. Taft III beat him, and then would go on to become the Ohio governor from 1999 to 2007. So until very recently, this guy, the Taft family, is still involved in a high level of politics.
And keep in mind, since we're hovering around Cincinnati, this is where Les Wexner, Jeffrey Epstein, and all of those are. It is also, back in the day, while they're still there, the place where Claire Chenault sets up the Rickenbacker Flying Tigers. This is the hub of every illegal drug and weapons, and God knows what else with Wexner, air traffic going in and out of the Cincinnati, Dayton, Ohio area.
Interesting. It's also University of Miami, Ohio. You asked about the Greek fraternities. The whole Miami triad were three of the earliest Greek fraternities, and that's right there in Ohio too. I don't know if that has anything to do with what you just said, but interesting coincidence.
So SR-71 said the movie was called Volunteers.
Yeah, I thanked him. Thank you.
He's amazing.
Yeah, well, we got a great group here to group source our thoughts. That way, when my memory fails, someone else can pick up the slack.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's Robert Alfonso Taft Jr. His father. Okay, the other child of. I'm trying to get these. The other child is William Howard Taft III, named after his uncle or grandfather. Trying to give him. I need to get the whole diagram.
Family chart.
Okay, he also goes to. Coincidentally, he goes to Yale, but was not a bonesman. Nothing too spectacular until 1949, when he goes to Dublin, Ireland, as part of the Marshall Plan. Okay, we've talked about the Marshall Plan as we were talking about Lovett and all the other, rebuilding Europe post-World War II. We don't need to cover that too much, but here's another one of these insiders that are part of that. And of course, in 1951, he worked for a couple of organizations called the CIA and the Department of Defense.
And which one is this one? I didn't write his name down.
William Howard Taft III.
The third. Okay. Mm-hmm. I just didn't know the last part of it. Okay.
So then he gets named the U.S. ambassador to Ireland in 1953, which is interesting. President in 1953 is Truman. And he names this guy. In 1957, he goes back to the State Department. In 1960, he becomes the Consul General in Mozambique. And that's
What?
right. Yep. And that's right after the Moeda massacre provoked a struggle in the independence from Portugal. And it would directly lead to the Portuguese colonial war from 1961 to 74. This guy was there.
What? So I have to ask you something. Do you think that the one Taft that was anti everything kind of got them out of favor of the Skull and Bones, and why some of the subsequent family members were not invited in? Because it seems like that was the cut.
Yeah, I don't know. And we also don't know if we have, I think we have a complete list of Bonesmen back to that period of time, but I don't know the answer. It's a great question to be asking.
Yeah, it does seem like they kind of moved away from them as a penalty for not completely being in bed with all of the ideas. It's just something that's noticeably different.
Yeah, it's possible. I went through that Taft school, their roster, and their alumni, and you don't see more than one or two Bonesmen, but you see tons of them that went to Yale. So there could be something to that.
Yeah. Well, it seemed like they had a pattern, and then they got cut off right about the time they disagreed with somebody.
Yeah, 3 generations of Tafts in Skull and Bones, including the founder, co-founder. So yeah. Okay, he would who are we talking about here? William Howard Taft III. We would retire from the State Department in 1977. His last position was the head of the Bureau of Scientific, Environmental, and Space Affairs, which is interesting in the 1970s. The environmental stuff was just kicking in.
So,
okay.
Hold on just a second. I'm still stuck on Ireland. So he's there as part of the Marshall Plan, and he becomes the ambassador to Ireland under Eisenhower.
It's Eisenhower in 53. Okay. Yeah, Truman was, yeah, you're right.
So I want to see the timeline, because I know, based on another book that I read, the whole IRA situation was part of Operation Gladio. Every time there's a prime minister that the club, the international syndicate, doesn't like in the UK, they activate the IRA. And then you have all of these battles and turmoils and everything to bog down, just kind of like what they did to Trump here, with the Antifa and the street, and they, did the Weather Underground. So every time there's somebody that they want to control or something they want to pass. And so I'm going to have to go back and look. He may have been the chaos agent in Ireland that set that all up with Marshall Plan money.
Yeah, and it's not to say that the IRA does predate, Operation Gladio by quite some time. And the Irish troubles go way back, but
everything does. But then they use that as a weapon.
Well, yeah, and it's almost self-evident, because if you follow the IRA and the big struggles of the 1960s and 70s, they had to get their weapons from somewhere, which means they were working with the underground, the global underground, which means they had connections with, of course, the CIA.
Yes. Well, I found a book. I lost the I had it saved on my archive when they dumped that whole, when they crashed the archive site. I read the whole book. It talked about the mafia / CIA in Boston and New York, under the guise of fishing, took trawlers of big ships over to the coast of Ireland to deliver the weapons. Yeah, it's all been documented.
Oh boy, fun stuff.
Right out of Boston.
Okay, here's my next guy. Next Taft. We just did his father. Okay, this is William Howard Taft IV. Goes to Yale, no Skull and Bones. Goes to Harvard Law. Now, he's pretty modern. He would very quickly become the legal advisor under the State Department under Bush II. He also served as, going back further, I said that one should have been further down the timeline. He was the assistant to Caspar Weinberger under the OMB under Richard Nixon. OMB, Office of Management and Budget, kind of a big deal.
Guy, a very important position.
Yeah. Then becomes the counsel for the Department of Health, which is an interesting position. I'm sorry, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, which is now Department of Education, which that changed under Carter a few years later. In 1981, Reagan appoints him to be the general counsel for the Department of Defense. So he is the Pentagon's general counsel during the middle of,
Iran-Contra.
Yeah. Then he becomes the Deputy Secretary of Defense in 1984, from 1984 to 1989. So he is there, and he knows what's going on.
He's in the middle of everything. He's in the middle of Angola. He's in the middle of using Israel as the weapons cutout for Angola, for the Nicaraguan overthrow. And he, of course, would be giving legal advice on all of these covert operations and the military's employment in them.
And what a perfect name to have it, William Howard Taft IV.
Yeah.
So he may not have been invited in the Skull and Bones, but he sure was going to the certain parties, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Okay, so George H.W. Bush takes over for Reagan, and he's trying to get his people nominated, confirmed, just like Trump's doing right now. So during that interim, he was the acting Secretary of Defense under Bush, which means we have had 3 Tafts be the Secretary of Defense in the history of our country. Interesting, huh?
During some very turbulent times.
Yeah, well, always. Now, do you remember who became the Secretary of Defense for Bush?
Dick Cheney.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And didn't his daughter, Liz Cheney, just get completely blown out of the water for her USAID connections?
Yes.
Did you catch the part about AOC starting her career with USAID? I
did not.
Yeah, in Boston College, she entered a undergraduate program with them, and eventually, I have to dig the whole story up again, but it's been making its way around the internet lately. Took a job overseas with USAID, someplace in Africa, which was a hot spot. But we'll get that.
So she's a CIA agent too.
Apparently so, not just a bartender.
Okay. Why does that not surprise me?
Yeah. Okay, so he gets replaced by Cheney in his next job as the ambassador to NATO during the Gulf War.
Son of a bitch. Are you kidding me? So wait a minute. He's NATO ambassador from 89 to 92. Huh. That's very interesting.
Yeah. Because Desert Storm was a NATO operation. Fun times, huh?
Yeah. So the revelation of Operation Gladio, August 2nd, 1990. This is the man sitting at NATO as the ambassador. Now, I want to juxtapose this thing. So he's sitting in Belgium in his U.S. ambassador seat at NATO. Andreotti is in Rome, Italy, on a stage saying NATO had ran Operation Gladio since 1948 and had murdered heads of state, had created terrorist organizations all over the world. Andreotti's literally announcing this, and the secret agreement that every NATO country had to sign an agreement to have Gladio operators in their country, and this guy's sitting at NATO headquarters.
Yep.
Okay.
And of course, he's just, fifth generation of a dynasty that have been sitting at similar positions throughout the entire American history.
Correct.
Disappears for a little while from the public. Probably went back and practiced law. He would co-author an article in the American Journal of International Law arguing for, in 2003, the use of force in Iraq. He did argue against the torture, though.
Okay, wait a minute. So he's at NATO when George H.W. Bush, fellow Bones, well, he's not a Bonesman, but Bonesman, goes to war with Iraq. And he's also in the State Department when 9/11 happens.
Yeah.
Where we go to Iraq again. Okay. All right. Just trying to keep up.
A lot of Forrest Gump type people. Okay, so we get to 2016. He is one of the 49 national security officials who vowed to never vote for Donald Trump.
Oh, I'm shocked.
In 2020, he endorsed Joe Biden and signed a statement with 130 other Republican national security officials saying Trump was unfit to serve.
What a son of a bitch. He's a fucking warmonger that took us to war with Iraq twice based on Operation Gladio false flags, and Trump's not qualified?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's all I have on him. I thought figured that was plenty.
So, these Taft's wives are people to watch as well, right? His particular wife, I came across, she was, let's see, when was she there? Okay, so from 97 to 2001, she was in the State Department managing the Population, Refugee, and Migration Program.
Any children involved in that?
Yeah, like a lot of them, a ton of them. And she did that job for who? Bill Clinton. So she would have been the one doing the whole Haiti bullshit and all of that stuff. Just FYI.
Goodness gracious. You have any more Taft stuff before I move on to a slightly different chapter?
There was another one, Julia Taft. Are you familiar with her?
I saw the name, but I didn't take any notes on it.
Okay, so I came across her. Let me see if I can find my note on her. Oh, that is her. Sorry, I had her last name spelt out as that's her. That's the one that, yeah, Julia Ann Vidalia Taft. Yeah, that's her. Because her dad was in the Army, like career Army, and she didn't I don't know where she got into the Taft what do I want to say, the Taft hierarchy, because she didn't seem like she was quite the caliber that they normally married, just coming from an Army surgeon doctor guy. But I came across her also in Vietnam. She was also responsible for the Indochina Migration Refugee Assistance Act during Gerald Ford. And if you remember, there was a huge baby lift during that, where they were stealing a whole bunch of babies and bringing them to the United States.
All right. It's going to blow you away. She became an aide to U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services, Elliot Richardson.
Yes.
Elliot Richardson had a very, very prominent career, including the Attorney General of Massachusetts, where one of his U.S. attorneys was my father-in-law.
Okay, that's crazy. Okay, that's crazy. Yeah. So she also worked at USAID.
Of course she did.
Yeah. So Go
I've
ahead.
got it here. She was Ford had her as the director of the Internet Agency Task Force on Indochina refugees. Gosh, goodness,
Yes, that's where she
all of
did the
that.
baby lift.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, it gets better. She also was responsible for coordinating programs like Care and Save the Children. You know, Save the Children, the one that's stealing all the kids from Guatemala. Yeah, the more you dig on her, the scarier she gets.
And just so you know, at the bottom of her Wikipedia page, apparently they had one of their children is William Howard Taft V, who doesn't have a Wikipedia page yet, but I bet he's doing something interesting. Oh, goodness.
Okay, now I'm done.
I'm actually upset with myself for not getting her in my notes.
Just add her in.
Well, it's because she's with
That's
us.
what you got me here for.
All right. So we move forward to the class of 1920. And we'll get to three of the bonesmen here, a few of them. The first one we're going to talk about is Britton Haddon. Have you ever heard of him?
No.
Most people haven't. There's a reason for that. His best friend.
For me.
What's that?
Spell his last name for me.
Hadden.
Okay.
Because his best friend, from their schoolboy days, was a guy by the name of Henry Luce, and they're the co-founders of Time Life in 1923. They're both bonesmen in 1920. Haddon was the first editor of Time, and he was a highly regarded writer, but he died at the age of 31 in 1929, 6 years after founding Time Life. Henry Luce would then sue his family to get his shares of Time Life and won.
Right.
And then Luce takes Haddon's name off the masthead of Time magazine within 2 weeks of his death. These guys were best friends. They both went to the Hotchkiss School, the feeder school for Yale, one of those elite private schools, and they were best friends from like the teenage years. And he did this to him.
That's right. So I remember reading that story when I was researching Luce, because Luce and his wife are intimately involved in Operation Gladio and how he ended up with Time Life.
Exactly. And Luce took credit for everything he did. In the next 38 years, Luce made over 300 speeches, and he mentioned Haddon 4 times. He basically memory holed his best friend, took all the credit.
Wow.
Uh-huh. So let's talk about Mr. Luce a little bit. Bonesman in 1920, and of course, he's best known for founding Time, Life, Fortune, and Sports Illustrated. He's born in Shandong, China, to a couple of Presbyterian missionaries, where he then come back to America as a teenager and went to the Hotchkiss School, where he became best friends, end quote, with Britton Haddon.
Okay, so hold on just a second. Stop right there. Does missionaries have lots of money? Okay, go ahead.
World War I strikes out. About a third of Harvard's campus is enlisted. Luce is one of the lucky ones to is able to go to ROTC route. So during World War I, he's wearing a uniform to class, but he's still at school. Now, he applied but failed to get a Rhodes Scholarship, which is interesting. The Rhodes Foundation, Rhodes Scholarship, is obviously one of these secret societies where you got to spend some time on pretty soon. But he wanted to be a Rhodes Scholar. Didn't get in. He goes to Oxford anyway on his own dime.
From the missionary parents?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
So he comes back to the U.S., takes a newspaper job. He's corresponding with his buddy Haddon. Finally, they decide they're going to found this Time Life, a magazine to keep all stories in one place. It's kind of like a super newspaper was their idea.
No way that's a real story, but go ahead.
He was the editor-in-chief for all of the publications until 1964. So for 41 years, Time, Life, and Fortune, he is the last say on what goes in there.
So what was the timing on when they created that?
1923.
So 1923, in the aftermath of World War I, where they realized they need to control the media, these guys who were missionary parents guy who supposedly would have no money, who has went to all of the best schools, somehow can afford to go to England to go to school, whose parents weren't real missionaries, just so happen to be in the right place, in the right time to create a media empire that just so happens to facilitate all of the international syndicate bullshit. All right, I'm trying to keep up here. Keep going.
You got it. A+ there.
Okay.
So he becomes really influential in the Republican Party because obviously he's writing opinion for Time and Life, sort of like Buckley would later writing National Review. It's when you're controlling what the media says, and so don't ever think the media has ever been unbiased. It just hasn't. He gets involved really, really loudly in what was known as the China lobby. And you're going to jump all over this, but basically they were trying to steer the U.S. foreign policy in favor of Chiang Kai-shek.
See this?
Uh-huh.
His name's written all over this book, The China Lobby in American Politics. Yeah. This is one of my favorite books. And go ahead.
And to that end, Chiang Kai-shek featured on the cover of Time 11 times.
Imagine that. The dictator?
Uh-huh.
Did they call him a dictator?
I would imagine not.
Okay. So Henry Luce is mentioned several times in this book. And just for those guys any of you that may be new to listening to me talk about Chiang Kai-shek, because it's one that I talk about all the time. The China lobby consisted of William Pauly, Chiang Kai-shek, all of the criminals of the Korea post-World War II gangsters, the criminals of the post-World War II war crime Japanese generals and officials. It basically was the apparatus that was set up, an international body called the China Lobby, to convince everybody in the world that Chiang Kai-shek was China. And most people do not realize that from the time the UN was set up until Richard Nixon basically recognized mainland China, Taiwan sat in the UN Security Council as China. It was internationally for almost 40 years as he ran Taiwan, which was Formosa, as a dictatorship, literally bayoneting people in the street in front of the U.S. Embassy, according to declassified State Department cables, while General MacArthur and the ambassadors there were saying that he was running a democracy. So the China lobby covered all that up. And the Claire Chennault, who married a Chinese slash Anne Chennault, was like the glue that held this entity together. And the craziness that went on in the brainwashing propaganda of the China lobby. And Henry Lutz was a huge funder and publicist for this entire effort. He ran the media campaign to convince America that Chiang Kai-shek was the rightful ruler of China from an exiled island called Taiwan.
Outstanding stuff. Boy, I had something to add, and I just lost my thought for a second. I read a comment in there. All along says, Lutz, on his way to Yale, stops off and visits a fellow missionary family in China and fellow Yale McCormick family in Chicago of the McCormick Reaper and Chicago Tribune. Well, we've talked about the Chicago Tribune before because we had a bonesman by the name of Cowles Jr. who worked at the Chicago Tribune, and there's probably a little bit more of the connection than that. I'd have to recheck my notes, but my memory's fading.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, let me find back where I was. Okay. I want to share the Time Magazine Person of the Year award. That's pretty interesting. Okay, here is the list of everybody who's been named Time Magazine, used to be Man of the Year, we now call Person of the Year. 14 unique United States presidents, 10 of which have done it twice. The only one to do it in consecutive years, of course, was Nixon in 71 and 72, which is hilarious because he'd be gone the next year or on his way out. Of course, the most recent one was Donald Trump, 2024 Man of the Year or Person of the Year, and congratulations. We've had 6 general secretaries of the Communist Party, including Stalin, Khrushchev, Andropov, and Gorbachev. Stalin got it twice. 4 chancellors of Germany, infamously Adolf Hitler, Adenauer, Willy Brandt, and of course Angela Merkel in 2015.
But Adenauer was the guy that hired General Reinhard Gehlen, who is the Nazi general that set up the German BND as his chief spy guy.
Yeah, and that's when you're the Chancellor of Germany right now, you are smack dab in the middle of the Marshall Plan as well.
Yes.
3 popes, 1 People's Republic of China, who did it twice, Deng Xiaoping in 78 and 85. What year is Tiananmen Square?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to look it up.
Yeah, I think it's 80s, if I'm not mistaken. It might have been 90s. That's it. It's right around there. 2 French prime ministers, including de Gaulle. And here we have Chiang Kai-shek in 1937. A few other fun ones, of course, was Anwar Sadat, Mossadegh of Iran, who, of course, you want to talk about Mossadegh and the CIA, we can do that all day long. Ayatollah Khomeini was Man of the Year or Person of the Year. Rabin of Israel, Arafat from the Palestinians, and of course, Vladimir Putin in 2007, something would not be allowed today. My favorite are the last two of the last 3, of course, Vladimir Zelensky and Winston Churchill. Zelensky got it in 2022. That was before the war started. Or no, it did start in 2022. That's right. And of course, Churchill got Man of the Year in 1940. Interesting list. Any comments?
So none about that, but I do want to say something about Henry Lutz's wife.
Yeah, please. I've got one closing thought on Luce, so you drop whatever you have now, and I'll close on Luce.
Okay. So obviously he marries Claire Booth Luce, who is a player in Operation Gladio in multiple ways. She becomes the ambassador to Italy in 53 to 56, which is at the heart of their Operation Gladio time there. And there are direct ties to Operation Gladio events happening in Europe to her specifically through the CIA. So she was definitely involved in all of that. But I got onto like a whole rabbit hole with her one day. She very outspoken about anti-communism, which is the code word for Operation Gladio. Her first husband was a guy by the name of George Tuttle Brokaw, like Tom Brokaw. I can't find Tom in the lineage, but I am told that there is a direct tie to this guy. And if you follow his and you look at him, you end up with him having married Claire Booth and also Frances Ford Seymour. And who is Frances Ford Seymour? She's the second wife of Henry Fonda. And the mother of Jane Fonda and Peter Fonda.
Outstanding.
So yeah, that was a crazy rabbit hole for me. But anyway, go ahead.
All right. Do you have anything else on Henry Luce, or do you want me to close up on him?
Yeah, no, I think you can. It is a big rabbit hole. And we've covered him a lot in Operation Gladio. He had a foundation that was paying for a lot of really suspect things. So, you can't downplay Time Life, because that's where the Zapruder film was found. You knew that?
I think so.
So when they finally tracked it down, it wasn't in the FBI, it wasn't in the CIA safe, it was in Time Life magazine safe.
I wonder how it got there.
It's a long story, but yeah, this Luce is a big deal.
Yeah, and I'm going to close on him with he's a big deal from another direction. He authors in 1941 a book called The American Century, or it's an article in Life magazine. It was. This is given credit for defining the role of U.S. foreign policy for the rest of the 20th century. This is Luce.
Yeah.
He has an awful lot of influence. He may not have sat in the seats of power, but he knew them all, and he's the one who handled the PR as far as one of the two biggest circulated magazines in the world. So that's Henry Luce for you. Great guy, huh?
Yes.
All right. What time do we have?
1:11.
Okay. I can, let's go through one more name because it's connected to what we talked about earlier. Yeah, this will take a little bit, but it's worth doing. Bonesman, class of 1923, is a guy by the name of Russell Davenport. His father was a Russell Davenport Sr., who was a vice president of Bethlehem Steel. So that's where they're. Why is Russell important? Well, he was an editor of Fortune magazine and created the Fortune 500 list, which we are all familiar with. Remember earlier, one of the Tafts got listed when they got the puff piece in Fortune, calling Cincinnati the best run city. Well, that was Davenport. Davenport becomes a personal and political advisor to a guy by the name of Wendell Willkie. I'm going to get into Willkie a little bit because he's got a really fascinating political story. And Davenport, the bonesman, is at his right side the entire time. And Willkie tries to become the Republican. He was the Republican nominee in 1940. This guy's an interventionist, and he's going up against Robert A. Taft, who was an isolationist. So we got bonesman versus bonesman. And the third candidate then the Republican Party was Thomas Dewey, who's a non-interventionist, which is a little bit different than an isolationist.
Yes.
But this guy, Willkie, was definitely an interventionist. He wanted the U.S. to join World War II. But it's funny, he wanted to be a Republican because he was a lifelong Democrat until 1939. His father was friends with William Jennings Bryan and slept under his roof. Willkie was a communist in college. Really good background for someone to become a Republican, right?
There's a lot of them, actually.
Yeah. So he's a delegate for the DNC in 1924 and 1932. That's the year FDR runs gets the Democrat nomination. But Willkie is operating behind the scenes trying to deadlock the convention. It didn't work, and then he goes back. Then he turns around and helped FDR and wrote him a check. He would end up helping FDR with one of the big things he did was the Tennessee Valley Authority, which was a government-sponsored electricity program throughout what they called the poor Tennessee Valley. I got to go on a side note. You heard Trump talk about the sovereign wealth fund. I completely disagree with that idea. It's a terrible idea. We want government out of the markets. It'll be corrupted at some point. Please don't get that executive order to go through. The Tennessee Valley Authority is a perfect example of why you can't have governments involved in markets, because there's just too many conflicts of interest and they crowd out the private sector. So that's Willkie was involved in that. So a little commercial for a constitutional topic that we talked about yesterday on my channel.
So he also was involved with Firestone. And most people would read his bio and see that and not even think a second thing about it. But you have to understand that Firestone and Goodrich and all of those people at this particular period of time was in every country that we eventually go to war with, whether it's Vietnam or overthrow Brazil, in Africa, where we went into several different locations, because those were rubber plantations feeding that industry. And we wanted it with the cheapest labor possible. So we destabilized those areas to basically steal their rubber.
Of course we did. So when he tried to become the nominee in 1940, he didn't run a normal campaign. He was just going to show up at the convention and hope it would be deadlocked, and then he'd be the compromise candidate. What he did, how his campaign was run, is Time and Life magazine kept writing favorable articles about him the entire time. Yeah. He would end up allying with FDR, and he lent a lot of political support for the Lend-Lease programs.
So he was the CIA candidate. Go ahead.
Yeah, he becomes FDR's emissary to check out these places: the USSR, China, and the Middle East. This is during the war.
He's also an IU grad, which is where I graduated from, unfortunately. But anyway.
Okay. When he's visiting Jerusalem, he writes to the British. He says, "This is an ancient conflict that could never be solved by goodwill and simple honesty." He spent some time staying with Charles de Gaulle. You get to Russia and you meet with Stalin, and this guy's been to meet a lot of people. He would advocate for more Lend-Lease programs for Russia after seeing them. This is during the war. He'd get to China, and he was hosted by none other than Chiang Kai-shek. So showing his true leftist roots, he comes back and he speaks out against colonialism. And after some of the things he wrote, Churchill comes back at him. He says, "I have not become the king's first minister in order to preside over the liquidation of the British Empire." That was Winston Churchill saying that. Then Wilkie would write something called One World. And it's a book that's urging America to join what he called a supranational global organization. Sound familiar?
One world government.
So from 1940, yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, finish that, because I've got a.
Well, I was just going to say that just because he speaks out against colonialism doesn't mean he's against colonialism. He's against people knowing it's colonialism, which is why you go to World War II, because it basically just transitioned us into a shadow world of colonialism under the guise of one world government apparatuses like the UN, the World Bank, and all of those others. It's still all colonialism. That he just wants to mask it.
Okay, so this book, One World, created what some historians call the Wilkie moment. From 1942 to 1944 in America, Wilkie had his moment. He was on everyone's, a lot of people were talking about him in his book. And his book talked about 3 geographies. And let me know if any of this sounds familiar. The first geography he called titular universalism, which is basically saying we're getting faster and faster travel and borders need to shrink. He's arguing for open borders. This is a Republican running for the office in 1944, or he's going to. He talked about, he says, the true conflict isn't freedom versus fascism, but racism versus empire.
Wait a minute. Say that one again. Say that one again.
Says the true conflict isn't freedom versus fascism, but it's racism versus empire.
So that means that the real conflict is freedom versus fascism and not racism versus, what did he call it? Racism versus
empire.
Empire. Yeah. So they're going, because everything they say is the opposite. So that tells you that they are going to use racism to continue their empire and they are going to take freedom and replace it with fascism. And
Boy,
that's Operation Gladio.
I wonder if you could learn any of those ideas in a college campus the last couple of decades. I mean, this is exactly what they're talking about with anti-colonial. This guy's one of the fathers of that whole movement. But agreeing with what you just said, as a historian named Samuel Zipp, he contends that these geographies was actually one of empire obscured.
Yes.
I love that. Isn't that a great term, though? Empire obscured.
Yeah.
Well, it's exactly what you just said, just with the different words. And so apparently you were very much correct.
I'm telling you, studying Operation Gladio makes you clairvoyant. When you go back and you read the words of these people, because everything they say is the exact opposite.
That's pretty Hegelian. So we get to the 1944 election, and well, let's just say he would die in 1944, and our bonesman Davenport would end up basically the de facto leader of the International Republicans, which is, I guess, internationalist Republicans. Who are the globalist Republicans today? These people are the thought leaders of them. I guess you would say probably the Bush faction falls into that now. Anyway, during that 1944 election, Wilkie's going around the country, still pretending to be a Republican, trying to, go into some of the primaries and seeing if he can win enough to launch a serious campaign. But Dewey keeps beating him in state after state, so he ends up withdrawing from it. Here's a mic drop moment. Dewey sent his own foreign policy advisor to Wilkie to see if he'll give him an endorsement to help him in the election. That foreign policy advisor for Thomas Dewey, John Foster Dulles. And then he dies very shortly thereafter.
Okay, that's funny.
Yeah. Not our greatest mic drop, but still.
Oh, you're not going to endorse my guy? Okay, you're dead.
I have no idea if that's what happened.
I know.
It was 1940.
It's just very suspicious.
Yeah.
It's like George H.W. Bush going to visit the British Prime Minister, and 2 days later they resign.
John Foster Dulles is Dewey's foreign policy guy, and Dewey runs against FDR. But somehow Dulles ends up back as part of the war party, because he was part of the OSS. But he's getting involved in politics. It's interesting how he's able to do that during a war. I've got some really fun guys queued up, but they require a little bit more depth. So I think we should stop there today.
Okay. I will say that if you guys want to do any looking on your own, I just real quickly was looking into Davenport's wife. She's very interesting too. Very interesting, actually. I'm fascinated with these wives because she worked on the staff of the New Yorker. Not that would be, influential or anything. Very involved in the arts. And was a writer. So she also has some really kind of weird sexual thing going on, apparently. So just saying, you might want to look at her too.
Very good. We haven't even gotten through the 1920s, and like I said, I'm looking forward. I want to do our next show tomorrow, to be honest with you. It's pretty juicy. It's some lesser known names, but really hammers home the patterns.
The lesser known names are the ones I find the most interesting, just like the stumbling across that company, Battelle. Who had ever heard of it? Everybody talks about Meta Beata and all of these other well-known companies. You find out, like the DAI company that we talked about yesterday, and that Kimronix, Those are companies no one's ever heard of, and they're controlling everything. It's this. That's the whole reason we're here.
Well, you talk about following the wives, and that's why I spend so much time looking at the boards of directors, because that's how they do. You have a lot of the wives of the players sit on boards of all the different agents, organizations, and corporations.
Yes.
And that's how a lot of the control is done. And it's by design.
Yes, absolutely.
Bottom line is we have a plutocracy runs our country. It is not a democracy. It is a plutocracy also that's run by an oligarchical system.
Yes. And I would say that it's very fascist / totalitarian because that's the way Italy was ran under Mussolini. So,
yeah, and Mussolini
an illusion of freedom here.
Yeah, Mussolini had a sovereign wealth fund too. Sorry, guys. I love President Trump. That sovereign wealth fund is a bad idea. It would be abused. And you do not have a sovereign wealth fund with a $36 trillion debt. You pay off the darn debt so future generations don't get enslaved. All right.
That's a mic drop moment.
Yeah.
All right. So we will be here next Thursday at noon. Hope to see you guys all here. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. You guys have a nice weekend if we don't see you before that, but I will be back here at 4 o'clock to do our normal show. So what do you got coming up, Brady? Do you have anything on the schedule?
I got a couple of more J6 interviews coming up. And then Doug and I on my Refederalist report are going to start diving into the Confederate Constitution, which is really fascinating. Forget about how you feel about the war one way or the other. The Confederates had 80 years of experience to look at how the U.S. Constitution, what it did well and what it didn't do well. So from a purely governing document standpoint, it's fascinating. And we'll get a little bit into the real causes of the Civil War too, because you have to understand what those guys were thinking at the time. And
that'll be fascinating.
Yeah, so that'll be a multi-week series, but that's coming up soon.
Maybe we can get Nikki Haley to watch that.
Don't think she likes my material.
I bet she doesn't. All right, you guys, go follow War Hamster. He puts out some crazy cool information and definitely is one of the most, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most respected researchers out there. So
humbled. Thank you.
You're welcome. Everybody needs to be following you. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. Thanks for being here.